Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Ned Smith. I am the Director of Pretreatment and Finance here at the Metropolitan Council's Environmental Services. Really excited to have such a great turnout on a Thursday morning. We're up to 33. That's good stuff. So we're here today to talk about our municipal inflow and infiltration I&I grant program for 2023 that was just passed in the session in the spring. So just an overview for what we'll walk through. We'll do some welcome introductions. We're going to do real time, and then we'll talk about the Met Council I&I program and some of the differences it's made. And then we'll break into what is the specifics of the 2023 program, how to use the customer portal for those interactions on the program. And then we'll do a brief update on our private I&I grant program. It's kind of a movie trailer for stay tuned for next week. And then we'll have time for any discussions or questions. Public I&I is a big deal to us. Mitigation makes a huge difference, and it's a key capital strategy for us. We've been doing this for over 15 years, but not by ourselves. It only works if the communities in the region work with us to make those differences, and we really appreciate it because we have stopped billions of gallons of clear water from entering our ES plants. And that's cheaper in a lot of ways. The first and most important is it reduces our capital expense. So we do not expand for clear water capacity. We only expand for solids. And so having an effective I&I program makes that possible. So we don't grow our plants because we're getting more rainwater. And that has saved us hundreds of millions of dollars from a capacity perspective. And then it also reduces our operating expenses and then our ongoing debt service. So treating less water costs us somewhat less money. So this is a huge program for us, very important, and very important that we have wonderful partners that we can work through this with. So grateful that you're here, grateful that you're learning more. And of course, we are grateful to the state for providing these funds. Especially Governor Walz, as well as the House and Senate that passed the bill, big bill for 2023. And then also Patty Nauman from Metro Cities. They are wonderful advocates for the I&I program as well. And they can often speak loudly in the chambers, House and Senate, in support of this program. So we're grateful for all of the work that goes into this. And we're really excited to roll this out today. And with that, I will turn it over to Walter Atkins.
Hey, thank you, Ned. Hi, everyone. My name is Walter Atkins, engineer with Wastewater Planning and Community Programs, and I will briefly be discussing the I&I program. Now, most of you are familiar with I&I or inflow and infiltration, but I&I is clear water that is not wastewater that enters the sanitary system that should not be there. It enters through cracks in the pipes, cross connections to stormwater systems, illegally connected sump pumps, so on and so forth. As it consumes the capacity of the conveyance and treatment systems, these excessive flows can result in public and environmental health concerns if untreated sewage is discharged to basements, rivers, lakes, or the environment. Excessive flows often result after wet weather events. Now, communities have been working for decades to address sources of I&I in the city sewer infrastructure, as well as improvements to water use efficiency. But as a result, overall flows have, decreased or remained steady the last 2 decades, despite population growth and increased rainfall, as you can see in these 2 graphs here. Now, we've convened multiple task forces in the previous decades where we've discussed best management practices for handling wet weather events. The 2016 task force reaffirmed the need to continue with regional I&I mitigation efforts, and the council's I&I program identified the need to focus on local community efforts to address private property I&I sources, and for the council to provide tools to assist communities in their efforts. Now, we monitor flows from each community and acknowledge there's going to be a natural degree of variation in flow throughout the day.
Hey, Walter.
Yep.
We have a comment that the slides aren't forwarding. Is everyone else experiencing the same thing? We should be there should be a chart that says about Met Council's II program. So maybe it's,
Yeah, I think they just, maybe you need to, Christine, maybe just log out and then come back in and see if that works for you.
okay, thanks, Walter.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, let's see. Anyways, so we know that there's going to be a degree of natural variation throughout the day as people wake up, go to sleep, as well as an acceptable amount of clear water that gets in through system deficiencies. No system is 100% perfect. That acceptable level of flow, which is the red dash line here, it's the I&I goal, which represents a reasonable hourly peak flow. This goal is communicated to each community through the MCES customer portal each year, and it factors in average flows, recent growth, and contains some allocation for some degree of imperfections. Now, this graph here shows a meter's response to a wet weather event, and you can see that the days preceding the rainfall event, which is the little blue bip here, which indicated an inch of rain fell in a short period of time, the flow fluctuates around 10 million gallons per day. But as soon as that rain event occurs, the flow jumps up to nearly 35 million gallons per day, exceeding the I&I goal and consuming valuable capacity in the conveyance system. Now, we notify communities if their peak flow exceeds 80% of the I&I goal, typically within the month following the event, which gives us a little bit of time to double check our data and ensure that the meter was functioning correctly. Now, if the I&I goal is surpassed, a work plan may be assigned where a community will need to commit to either performing I&I mitigation work or may choose to pay a surcharge amount directly to MCES. Now, not all communities have a work plan. In fact, most currently do not. However, many communities have had a work plan in the past and have worked hard to reduce I&I from their system. The MCES customer portal allows users to submit I&I work plans and apply for work credits online, receive related program information, and that's also where you can obtain meter data for your meter shed to assess your own community's I&I responses following wet weather events. Now, that's just a brief introduction of the I&I program. Full details on the I&I program procedures and key dates and timelines can be found in the link provided. And you can also please feel free to reach out to me with any questions. Okay, I will now pass it on to Matt Zellmeyer to discuss the 2023 I&I grant program. Thanks.
Thanks, Walter. So hopefully everyone can hear me. My name's Matt Zellmeyer. I'm the budget manager in environmental services. And I've been working on this grant program for quite a while now, 9 or 10 years, dating back to the 2014 program. So I know I've worked with a lot of you on this before. And I want to thank a lot of people, certainly Patty, as Ned mentioned, and Ned and our council members, as well as participants. The program's gone really well. It's been a good collaborative effort. And so I'm really thankful for all the partnerships on the program. So this is a list of all the eligible cities. There's about 80 cities, and you might hear me say the word municipality, but using that interchangeably with cities. But really, when we're thinking about this II grant program, the legislative language does specify that you have to be a city to participate. So no townships or other governmental entities. And then we have the cities underlined here. Of the 80 cities, about 22, I would say, of them are underlined as being eligible for equity criteria with this grant program. So that's going to be a new dimension to this grant program, being equity eligible. And we'll certainly be talking more about what that means in the coming slides. And let me just move on to the next slide here. Okay, so the state requirements. The state requirements have not really changed significantly from prior programs. The funding has to be to publicly owned and publicly operated projects, so it can't be on private property. It has to extend the useful life or substantially increase the value of the fixed asset. It can't be operating or overhead expenses. It can't be things like, engineering costs. And then there's some responsible contractor requirements, and MS 16A.695 restricts the sale, lease, and management contracts. You can't take the money, do a project, and then sell the property. So those are the same state requirements we've had for a while. And then some other information that's linked here is the Capital Investment State Bonding Guide. If this is new for you and maybe you're new to using state bonding funds, that might be a useful resource. And then the N-Grant Agreement, there's a link to that in this presentation as well. The N-Grant Agreement hasn't changed in several years, and it won't be changing, to my knowledge, for the course of this program either. But there's a link if you want to go out and look at that, 40-ish page state contract that we all need to fill out in order for these funds to be transferred from the state to the council to the municipality. This looks like someone is still seeing Walter's slide. So Dan, maybe we've been trying to log off and log on. Hopefully that'll help. Okay. So then the bonding bill language for this specific appropriation, it's $12 million, which is the most we've ever had. So that's really exciting. And it's a nice increase. Last grant, we had $5 million. And in order to be eligible for the program, cities have to have been within 20% of the allowable flow limit that the council sets. So the council monitors flow. We set allowable flow limits with I&I in mind, and cities who have come within 20% of that flow limit qualify for this program. Now, if your city qualified 20 years ago and hasn't had an issue since, you're still on the list. Once you're on the list, you're on the list for all these I&I grant programs going forward. And then finally, it's pursuant to the council's guidelines, which are pretty similar to the previous programs, but I'll go over those here in our next slide. So the council guidelines, once again, it's qualified spending over a 2-year period, same as last time. The spending for this program can begin on January 1st, 2024, and it can go through December 31st, 2025. So two calendar years is when the costs have to occur, when the project has to occur and the costs occur. Only construction costs qualify. We have the part 1 and the part 2 funding. I'm going to go through a funding example in a little bit. So, there's quite a few stipulations, or maybe calculations is probably a better word, in the way that we calculate the reimbursement. And really what we're trying to do with those, there's 3 things we're trying to do. The first is to help smaller communities so they can get, a reasonable piece of the pie. The second thing is really having an equity focus that I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk about here in a minute. And then the third thing is, based on the type of work, trying to provide more funding towards project work that has the biggest impact on reducing inflow and infiltration. So again, we've had the same process as before. We'll calculate your part 1 and part 2 funding. And then one other change that's for this program, it's highlighted in blue, is the 75 to 100% of what I call is the percent covered. So the state, previously in the state language, it said you can pay for up to 50% of eligible II costs. That component's come out of the language for this last round. And in addition, we have more funding. So now we're taking that 50% and we're going to move it up to 75% for everybody. And then if you're in one of those equity eligible communities, it'll be 100%. So I think I've got a funding example here. Actually, no, I'm going to turn it over to Ned first. He's going to talk through the equity component, and then I'll come back to talk more about the funding example.
All right, thanks, Matt. And my apologies to those of you who seems like you have to log out and log in every time we change a slide. So good thing we don't have that many slides, but so I apologize for that complication. Yeah, this year, and it's a very a focus for both the governor and for the Met Council is around equity. And one of the ways that we're looking at equity is thinking about communities that have limited fiscal capacity. A lot of times, in fact, very often when I testify, particularly this year with the surplus, one of the things that the House kept asking was, why stop at 5? Why not do $50 million? And frankly, one of the concerns that we have is, well, 2 of them. One of them is capacity of the contracting community, but the other is capacity of the cities, both administratively and fiscally. So, and I'll say from an administrative standpoint, we've taken a lot of steps in partnership with the MMB to keep this as simple as possible. I realize it looks far from simple, but many other bonds agreements are much more complex than this. So we are trying to minimize the administrative costs and administrative burden, but we also want to be sensitive that not all cities can afford to do all of the work that they really need to do. And so that's why we've kind of put as the part one funding is a measure to look at the capacity of the city to make investments in its own infrastructure. And what we're using for that as a proxy is the net tax capacity per capita. So that's looking at property tax capacity. That's the reason we like it, is because it's consistent across all communities. They all have property tax capacity, and then we just normalize it so that the larger cities aren't taking it all. So the normalize is per capita. So that's how we normalize that. So everybody's on an even playing field. This is not a new measure. It's often used in other council investments. Recent example is the Community Development Division's Planning Assistance Grant Program. So we've used this in the past and been successful. So what we're drawing that line is, if you are a community with a 2021 net tax capacity per capita that's lower than 85% of the median of the eligible communities, which is 1286 for those keeping math at home, your part one will be 100%. And on that list back about 2 or 3 slides ago, when we listed all of the cities, you might have noticed that some were italicized and underlined, and those are the cities that are below that 85% threshold. So this is a pilot. You can see right there at the top, it says pilot. This is one way to think about equity. And so we want to try this for this go round, and then we're going to hopefully do some analysis in terms of where the work was done and who received who benefited from that work, what neighborhoods received it, what were the demographics of those neighborhoods, to try to figure out if we are reaching our equity targets here. So it's a little bumpy, so we appreciate your partnership as we try this pilot out. And as the program goes on, of course, we'll be interested in feedback, and then the next program we'll think if that's the way to do it, or if we want to explore another one. But that's where we are for our equity program. Matt?
All right, I think I am still sharing. I don't think I ever stopped sharing. So just moving to the next slide. Hopefully we're all here. This is the eligible and non-eligible work. And the type of eligible work is still the same as former grant programs. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, the percentages are based on the amount of benefit to reducing I&I. So pipe joint sealing, really beneficial. That's 100% eligibility for reimbursement. The only change we've made on these eligible pieces is just maybe a little bit of small shuffling between pieces to align with the II program, to try and hopefully make things long-term as simple for communities as possible. So like one example that I have is that we used to have, let's see if I can find it here. We used to lump pipe joint sealing and chimney seals under item 2. Now the chimney seals is down under item 4. So it's still eligible. It's just, and it's still the same percent. It's just being lumped in a slightly different way so that it aligns with the II program a little more seamlessly. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the non-eligible work: studies, investigations or inspections, engineering costs, and improvements to privately owned infrastructure. No, this work has to be on public infrastructure. So moving on to a funding example, the first thing we do is we look at all the types of work cities are doing, and we look at their total project costs, and then we have what I call a percent covered, which is that amount that it used to be stipulated by the legislature that 50% was the most that a community could get. Now that caveat's been removed and we have more money, that's up to 75% for all the communities. And if it's one of those equity eligible communities, then that's up to 100%. So that gives us sort of that maximum amount that can be covered. And then from there, we use those eligibility percentages based on the type of work and apply those. And that gives us what we call the eligible amount for funding for each community. So once we have those eligible amounts calculated, then we get into our part one and part two funding. So again, this is to try and help, maybe a smaller community, so there's not really a weighted average component to that first part of the funding. So in this case, there's 4 cities, each would get 50,000, their first 50,000. You can see City 4 would only had 45,000 eligible, so they would get that full 45,000, and then that would take care of their entirety of their eligibility percentage. From there, we do basically a weighted average distribution with all the remaining funds available. So in this hypothetical, there's 12 million. We paid out 195,000 in the part one. And I will clarify, even though you might hear me say we pay out 195,000 in part one, it's all going to come in the form of one check. This is just how we reimburse it, is how we calculate the reimbursement, or one financial transfer. So in this case, there'd be that 195,000 for part one, and then that would leave a remaining $11 million, 11,805, and we would have 15 million eligible. Well, we can't pay out all 15 million because we don't have enough left to pay that out. So then we go to that weighted average distribution for the part two allocation. And in this case, it was, in a hypothetical 75.9%. So then everyone would get 75.9% for that second part. I've also listed kind of the historical percentages to give you a sense for what the part two reimbursement might be. It was 68.5% in 2017 out of a pot of 8.7 million, and it was 22% out of a pot of 5 million. So I expect the percentage will be higher certainly than that 22% we just saw, because we have a bigger pool of money. So now moving on to our tentative grant calendar. Today we're having our information session. That's the first point highlighted. And in a couple, 2, 3, 4 weeks, I'll present the guidelines to the Environment Committee. 2 weeks after that, it'll go to the Metropolitan Council for approval, which is tentatively scheduled for December 13th. After that, we'll submit our request for participation. Really, that's the application part of the process by December 20th. So we're still working on our portal a little bit, getting some of that equity component incorporated there, but we're hoping to have the applications all up and running and sent out by December 20th. From there, that January 1st date is there because that's the first day that eligible work can be covered. One thing I didn't point out before is that, that's the reason it starts on January 1st is also because we're trying to keep the II program and the II grant program aligned. So it's both on that calendar year start and end date. And then the grant applications will be due January 26th. So that gives you a little bit over a month to complete that. And then we'll take about a month to calculate. Basically, what we'll do is we'll calculate based on all of the amounts received what a preliminary minimal allocation is and what an estimated final reimbursement amount is. So it'll be a letter that'll come and say, if you do the work that you said you were going to do, you'll get at least that first 50,000, and then potentially up to a certain amount based on the percent, that part 2% that we'll calculate. That said, you're not tied to that work. This is just for estimation purposes. This is an end grant once again, which means you do all the work and then we calculate the final reimbursement totals at the end of the program. And then you'll be completing the work. It will be kind of that couple year period after that where you're completing all the work, keeping your invoices and documentation of the work. And then the end of the eligibility period will be December 31st, 2025. And then the end grant materials, I'm going to go over that in the next slide. It's again the same as last program. We'll give you about 3 months to compile all of those materials and send them to us. That'll be due on March 31st. And then we're going to work to send the grant agreements, have the full grant agreements all done and sent back to you by May 1st. And then once we get the final signature, we'll process the payment at the end of the program. So the required end grant materials, this is again the same as prior programs. The first is a cost verification form. That's just about a 2-page form where you're going to say, based on those 7 types of work that we mentioned, this is the dollar amounts that you did in each of those categories, maybe a paragraph or 2 about the work you did. And a pretty short form that you'll fill out. The second thing is a declaration or certification. So we once again have a waiver letter from the Commissioner of MMB, meaning that we do not need to do the declaration form. That's very good because I have done a state bonding bill grant program where a declaration form was needed, and that means that you need easements and all the proof of your property. You don't need that. All you need to do is you're just going to need to fill out that same certification form. You're going to have it notarized, and it's just going to be that you're certifying that, yes, we are working on public infrastructure on the city's property. So that's what another thing you'll need. You'll also need a city resolution. It's a pretty short, basic resolution is fine. We have a couple of examples that we'll give you as you know later in the process when you're filling that out. It's basically just so that the city council knows that you're doing the work and that they're on board with you participating in the program. And then the last two kind of go together. It's just a breakdown of expenditures and invoices substantiating the cost of work completed. So we take time to review all those costs that you have and make sure that they match up to what's in the totals that you submit and make sure that they're eligible grant amounts. So, and then again, we've just got a link to the end grant agreement here. If you'd like to review that, you know, at a later point in time. So now I just wanted to show you a couple of screenshots from our customer portal. This is from the 2020 application, and the 2023 application, as I mentioned, it's not yet ready. We're still trying to get the equity component added in, but I just want to show you how easy it is to apply to this program. You know, there's a login. You log in. If you have logged in, most of you probably logged in the past. If you haven't, you can email myself or Ward, who's in this email, and we can work to help get you set up with access. Then you'll just click on, this says 2020 because it's from the last program, but there will be a new one for 2023. And you'll click on, you know, the apply button. And this is pretty much, this is the application. And it looks a lot like what the cost verification form looks like at the end of the process. You're just giving a little description of the work that you're going to do and submit for, you know, this is the 6 types of work. That's the old screenshot there. I think that's for the 6 types. There'll be the 7 categories. You'll fill in the dollar amounts you plan to do, and then you'll click apply, and that's it. I mean, if you have all that information, you can really do it in about 5 to 10 minutes. So it's a pretty smooth application process, and it worked pretty well last time when we went to doing it on the customer portal. So that's it. I'll certainly be around for questions at the end, but now I'm going to turn it over to Emily, who's going to talk a bit about the private I&I grant program.
Thanks, Matt. My name is Emily Schoen, and I'm a principal engineer in wastewater planning and community programs. And I'm giving a quick introduction to a pilot grant program for this year for private property I&I mitigation efforts. This program provides grant funds to private property owners for I&I mitigation repair costs. It was designed in early 2023 with guidance from a task force of community representatives. The Met Council has set aside $1.5 million for this program, which is a new opportunity for us with the change to Minnesota Statute 473.342. And just a quick summary of the grant program. Grants may be 50% of eligible project costs up to $5,000. And for residents meeting a community's equity criteria, grant awards may increase to up to $10,000. There are links on the slide for more information, and also will be a remote information session next week where you can get more information and ask more questions.
All right, so I'm Ward Brown. I'm the financial analyst for Met Council Environmental Services, and I am also going to be the grant administrator from the financial side, certainly for this grant. I know I've been in contact with quite a few of you through the public I&I program that has just been completed, and so I'm glad that I can put my face to my name this morning. Right here, this is just showing a tentative schedule for the activity for this private I&I grant program that Emily summarized, did a great job. Thank you, Emily. Again, I want to reiterate that next Thursday, November 9th, will be this very similar information session for the private I&I grant program. So if you are not able to sign up for that, please let us know. We had invitations going out through GovDelivery, but if you missed it somehow, let us know, and we'll get you the invite out so that you can register for it. So moving along, the information will be going out on November 20th. So this would be the guidelines to municipalities, the applications themselves, and then the grant applications will be due on December 15th. Unlike the public program, right now the applications for this private program will not be done through the portal. We will be trying probably to work towards administering this through the portal in the future. But for right now, with this being the pilot program, we're just going to do it. Essentially, it's going to be a Word document. You'll fill in some blanks and then return it to us. So moving back to the schedule on December 29th, I'm sorry, the due date for the application is December 15th, and then Met Council Environmental Services will notify the grant awards on the 29th. This is a one-year program right now, so the start date for the project work will be January 1st, and the end date will be, of course, December 31st. The municipalities will be submitting pay claims, pay requests quarterly, which is similar to the water efficiency grant that's been, that I'm sure many of the municipalities have been participating in. And then we will wrap up reimbursement amounts upon receipt of the signed agreement, again, similar to the public program. And that should complete our presentation today. So now we're ready for taking questions, comments, and I'm going to let Jamie monitor that. But thank you all very much.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions, and you should be able to unmute yourself, but let me know if you're not able to. Any questions out there? You can click on the little raised hand if you have any. And again, as Ward mentioned, feel free to contact us. We have our contact information posted here, so it's easier for you guys to find. Eric, are you able to unmute yourself, Eric? Let's see if I have to do it.
Looks like you
looks like
put it
he-
in the chat. Will the
Okay.
tax equity portion be provided by MCS? Yes, we can show you the master kind of spreadsheet that went into divide finding that. We got that data from our community development group, and we can certainly share that.
Then I see a question from Christine. Will the slides be emailed out to all participants today? What we'll do is we will put all these resources out onto our council website. And then as we notify folks of, further as we go through the process, we'll continue to have links to these items. I don't know if it'll necessarily go out today, but it will come in a future. There will be future links to this presentation and to other resources
Okay, I think I just found a setting to let you guys unmute. So if anybody else has questions, feel free to try unmuting yourself. See, we have another poster question there.
Matt, do you see that? Will access projects to get manholes to mitigate I&I be an eligible reimbursement? I think yes, but you should probably provide more
Yeah,
detail.
or maybe Kyle, I'm not an engineer, so I'm thinking like an access project. Um, I guess I'm not sure what that means.
So we have manholes in wetlands that are difficult to get to, and we're looking at creating a pathway over them. So we would at the same time seal those manholes, and it would provide us access to line the pipes as well. And so just wondering if, you know, the cost associated with building the roadway through a wetland to get access to those manholes would be an eligible expense.
And I'm going to turn that over to Kyle or Walter for that clarification.
Yeah, I think if this is Kyle, manager of the wastewater planning community programs group. If the roadway or access is necessary in order to accommodate or complete the mitigation efforts, then we usually will allow those expenses. I think a parallel could also be drawn where I believe that sometimes traffic control can also be eligible. So my first response would be I believe it would be eligible at the same percent eligibility that whatever the improvement is assigned.
Any other questions? Christine had a question on, will the slides be emailed out to participants? If you register, we should have your email on record. So we can email you a PDF of the presentation.
Yeah, I sort of answered that one already, Jamie. I said we'll add it to our council website as well. I put a link in the chat to our council website where that grant information is. And
Okay.
then, you know, as we're communicating and soliciting for applications, we'll have links embedded in that communication to the PowerPoint. And we'll also put a recording from today out on our, I think we're going to try to put the recording from today out on our website. So we will get the information to you in hopefully more than one message and communication.
Any other questions?
Well, I'll just say I'm excited that we have $12 million. I mean, that's a big jump from the last one, and I think it's going to do a lot of good for everybody. So kudos to the folks that put that through.
What did you have last time, Matt?
Last time was 5.
5, okay. Wow. That's significant.
Mhm.
Impressive. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, we can wrap up. Oh, let's see. Oh, we said a thank you. Okay. Yes,
I think
thanks
we
so
should
much.
wrap up. So thank you so much. And again, if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or someone on the team. We really appreciate you being here. I think we peaked at 39. That's a good crowd. So excited to get this work done out in the community. So thanks so much for coming, and we'll be in touch.